Welcome everyone, this is Tim Pullman and you're listening to the SEP Couch. This podcast is all about standard essential patents. We talk about patent strategies, FRAND licensing, patent pooling, and patent litigation. So let's dive into today's episode.
She is the Director of IPR Policy and the Legal Academic Research at Ericsson. I'm so happy to have here Claudia Tapia from Ericsson today. Hi, Claudia.
Hi, Tim. Thanks a lot for inviting me here today. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm glad you say that, and it's good to see you again. I think also the two of us know each other for quite some time now, because you also have a similar background like I have, coming from academia, joining the field of SEPs and FRAND. And it would be great to get started if you could start with explaining a bit where you came from, why did you get in touch with the topic we all care about, and walk us through a bit your career steps.
Sure. So I studied law in Spain, and after that, I worked in a bank for 1 year. And after that, I moved to Munich, to Germany, where I'm still living. At that time, I just wanted to be for 1 year, but I fell in love with the city. And I worked 3 years in another bank. But I was missing this legal aspect. So I decided to do an LL.M in German law with a specialization in international patent law. And I needed to find a topic for my master thesis. So I talked to my tutor at that time, Professor Joseph Strauss, and he proposed 3 topics. And one of them was SEPs and FRANDs in the telecommunication industry. So I thought, that's an exciting topic. I had absolutely no idea what I was entering in, but I chose that. And when I finished the master program, I realized I want to know more about the topic. So I asked and received a grant from Max Planck Institute. So if someone from Max Planck Institute is listening, thank you so much. And I was able to do my PhD on this topic, SEPs and FRAND. So at that time, there weren't books on this topic. I was quite frustrated at the beginning, but then I decided to talk to everyone I could on the topic. So I interviewed over 60 professionals from patent offices, companies, academia, organizations, like everyone who has been in a way or another connected to FRAND. And one of these companies was BlackBerry. So as soon as I finished my PhD, they offered me a position for where I stayed like 5 years doing different things, but mainly advocacy. And then I moved to Ericsson, where I've been since the last 7 years. And I'm now leading the research on IPR policy worldwide. And I'm also president of FRAND Council. And by the way, this brings me to a disclaimer, an important one, which is that the views that you will hear today and listen today are my own and do not necessarily represent the opinions of Ericsson, FRAND Council, or any of the supporters. And for those who still don't know, FRAND Council is like number 4 IP council, and it's a non-profit council which focus on the link between IP and innovation and the relationship between both of them. And there's a lot of free material also on this topic of SEPs. We recently launched one section which is on the key findings of SEP-related research. So I strongly recommend you to look at it. And anyway, I think this has been my story. And last week I was in a conference in a panel discussion on, of course, FRAND and SEPs. And I realized how excited I was, and my panelists were on the topic. I think you never get bored with this topic. And I think this is why I'm still, despite all these years, doing things on SEPs and FRAND.
That is great, Claudia. And I think it's so important that we have more research on the topic. and doing research by interviewing people, understanding the complexity of the space we're in. I think that is really, really important. And I think also the topic will not get too boring soon, because there's so many challenges ahead. Of course, SEPs in new industry verticals. I've seen also webinars, you were involved in those, speaking about IoT and SEPs. But maybe let's start high level. You've studied this field of FRAND for so many years and SEPs. And if you think about it right now, if you think about the FRAND framework, could you tell us a little bit, in that ecosystem, in your opinion, what is working well right now and what is probably not working so well?
Okay. What is clearly working very well is the dissemination of standards. So if you look at how standards have evolved from 0 to 5 billion users in 30 years, from 0 to 5 billion users in 30 years, for me, this is a proof that the system is doing great. We are creating smart factories, intelligent transport systems, smart cities. And we have more people having and owning smartphones than water toilets in this planet. And I think this is kind of amazing. You get consumers who get and enjoy diversification of products or services, and they do it at reasonable prices. If you look at the industry, they also are benefiting hugely. I'm going to give you an example because I think always with examples, people connect easier with what people are saying. So estimates are by 2030, automotive companies will increase their revenues by 30% thanks to the cellular connectivity. So what I'm talking about is 1.5 trillion US dollars. Now let's now move into what does not work that well. And I will say that I don't see much incentive for implementers to reach a negotiated SEP license agreement. So let me give you a little bit background so you can see where I'm going. You know, Tim, that the standardization and the FRAND is kind of unique thing. You get implementers using the standardized technology before the SEP owners even approach them to negotiate the terms of a license. And even when the parties are negotiating, if they don't find an agreement of what FRAND is, they still keep using it. So this is why SEP holders, some of them, they end in litigation, they have to go to court. But then these very same implementers are taking a license, an SEP license, which is still on FRAND terms. So what's the incentive to negotiate on good faith? And then we have the extreme cases where you have some implementers, they refuse to take a license, even when we have a court and an appeal court adjudicated a FRAND license. And you may have followed this Ericsson versus HTC case in the US. So where are we now? What should we do? So I hear some people talking about damages. They say, well, it's okay, we grant damages for the past infringement of these SEPs which are not licensed, but I don't think this is efficient. I don't think, if you're looking at large SEP portfolios, damages are limited to individual patent suits. So we are talking maybe a couple of patents, a very small share of the whole SEP portfolio. Damages do not properly compensate for all these additional costs that you get into because you are enforcing the patents. You see that also the damages, they do not sanction this bad faith behavior of the infringer. So you are litigating for years. And the worst thing that the infringer gets is that they get a FRAND license agreement, or they face injunction, but only in this specific market. So this is why I think we need incentive to negotiate. so that we get more negotiation over litigation. So that's it.
And I actually like the analogy with the toilet. I didn't know that. Interesting comparison. I guess there's a toilet app then. That's gonna happen.
Probably.
But,
There's not for everything.
but thank you, Claudia, for elaborating on this. I keep hearing, because I, of course, interview both sides of the table, the implementers, same as those that provide the technology, that the implementer side keeps feeling that there is no clear understanding what FRAND is, and they often feel that rates are not yet reasonable. Do we have a good enough understanding what FRAND is? Is that really the issue, or what is your opinion on this?
So I think we can agree that FRAND is this crucial pillar for the success of the cellular standardization. And we see it with the technology that we are developing and the fact that consumers are getting at such reasonable rates. But this is because it balances the interest not only of the technical contributors, but also of the technical users, because otherwise it doesn't work. So what FRAND manages is to ensure that contributors participate. They participate in 3GPP, they create the technology, and this is why the standard development organizations attract the best contributions. And they can develop these best standards. And you see, for example, 4G, they transfer data 12,000 times faster than with the 2G networks. We need years, huge investments, collaboration, but you only attract those contributions if you have a FRAND compensation. But then on the other hand, FRAND is also supporting broad deployment of the standard. So why is it? It's because any interested party can use this patented standardized technology in their products, processes, services. So I do think that FRAND is clear enough and it's flexible enough to address this wide heterogeneous group of situations and to address also different commercial realities. So what I mean with it's clear enough, I mean, you know that you cannot go there and ask whatever you want to have. And you also know if you want to raise a FRAND defense and avoid an injunction, that you have also some rules to follow. But on the other hand, FRAND is flexible enough so that it covers many different areas. For example, we have seen recently with the Digital Markets Act that they include this reference to FRAND terms regarding to access to data. And the only reason why it can cover many areas successfully is because it does not go into very single detail. So there's a part of the discussion that I'm always missing here, which is that the vast majority of cases, we have two parties negotiating in good faith, and we get FRAND agreements licensed and signed. And only in rare occasions where we don't find agreement of FRAND, we may go to court, and that the courts are providing guidance regarding these FRAND terms when we are having disputed issues. And this allows us, from the industry point of view, to have a much better understanding of what is FRAND and what is not, which brings me to the point, if you allow me. In FRIP Council, we have one section is called National Courts Guidance. So there you can see from both sides what is important for you to consider and what courts have said about what is FRAND and what is not. I think that's
interesting. Now that sounds like a good resource to get a better understanding here. You have talked about incentives, and I think in the patent system, in the legal system in general, it's probably always about either carrot or stick, right? I mean, incentives, but sometimes you also have to apply some pressure, I guess. If you think about the legal system in general, and you said that already in the beginning, there are some things that are not working well because in your view, some of the implementers have little incentive to find a fast, or get a deal done quickly. If you had a wish, if you were to make a wish, what the legal system should change, what would that be? How could we create more incentives for implementers to, go to the table and be a good and willing licensee?
right. my wishing list. This can be part of Christmas time, right?
I was going to say.
So, what could I change? What would I change? I think we have seen in the last years that injunction system has been calibrated by the Court of Justice of the EU, in this case, Huawei versus CT. And what I will really wish is to have FRAND also calibrated when you're facing unwilling licenses. And let me share with you what I have in mind when I'm saying this. You need to imagine that companies like Ericsson, we start investing in R&D to develop these cellular standards, usually 6 to 8 years before this collaborative standardization effort begins. So right now we are investing and working for 6 years. What does it mean? It means that when we have the SCP licensing, this negotiation starts years after the first R&D investments. Ericsson alone has invested over the last 3 years, 12 billion euros. 12 billion euros in R&D. And that's around 18% of the revenues every year. And the same as Ericsson or the companies or the contributors. And now you start doing some math. You get these 6 to 8 years that you invest first in research and time. Then you get the multiple years that you need to develop this standard with other companies. And you extend this already very long period because you're facing holdout behavior of some implementers with a lot of money to afford doing this. So as you can imagine, this puts a lot of pressure on the cash flow management of these companies that are creating these standards. And they have to continue investing in development of the next generation of the standard and wait years and years before being compensated for that use of that technology. So I guess that my point is, if a court determines that you have been unwilling because you've been trying to delay, avoid signing a license agreement, you should not be treated the same as a willing licensee. Because otherwise what you get is that the unwilling licensee is put in a competitive advantage versus the willing licensee. And that cannot be fair, right? And since we are here in the wishing list moment, I think I would also like to discuss this duration of the court proceedings. You may have heard this say from justice delayed, justice denied. And I think because this holdout behavior affects negatively the ability of these innovators to be compensated. So having the FRAND issues resolved earlier, I believe this is better for the ecosystem. So, and I guess you would say, yeah, but how long? I think 12 months for the FRAND case, maybe 6 months of appeal. That will make it.
Interesting.
So you're Santa Claus. I hope to have my wishes.
I'll forward your list to Santa Claus. Let's see what's going on in Christmas. But we have some months to go, and we will observe what's going on in court decisions ongoing right now. But let's see. But great. I mean, one point you made, and I think that is, I would fully agree with that. When we discuss the whole set licensing, the parts about the technical part, for example, the litigation about damages, where you identify, are there SCPs or not, is, to put it frank, it's the boring part, because does Ericsson have 4G, 5G patents? I sometimes believe, why do you even have to give evidence? Because that's, you will have something in your portfolio that is essential, right? And one bullet kills, so you need just one patent. What is more exciting is the part after, where you determine FRAND, right? So what is a reasonable rate? And there, also in some cases, there's the portfolio is looked at, not if everything is essential and claim charted maybe, but what's the value of that? And there's different ways and approaches to kind of understand this value compared to the overall patents that exist for a technology. What is your opinion? What makes most sense on how to determine the value of the SAP portfolio? Comparable licenses, I think, is the most used, but there's also in some cases a combination of that with a top-down approach. What is your opinion? What are the pros and cons of these kind of concepts in negotiating FRAND?
Okay, let's start by saying that FRAND license must reflect the economic value that this patent technology adds to the end product. So that's something that courts have agreed with. And then later on is how you calculate that. As you said, courts generally look at comparable licenses. And I think that makes sense because comparable licenses are literally reflecting the real commercial deals. And they take years to negotiate. You have a bunch of experts being involved in the process. And this is the real business. But of course, these deals are not all identical. So there are some nuances between one license agreement and the other license agreement. And this is why when you're using comparable agreements, this is rather to create a benchmark reference point that you can use or the court can use as guidance for valuation of the license. And now to the top-down methodology. I think that it could help you, as you have seen in some courts, to cross-check when you have done the comparable licensing valuation and use it as a cross-check methodology. And we have seen it with the UK court in Unweb Planet versus Huawei. Top-down may be also interesting if you don't have any comparable license agreement to look at. But here's the thing. With top-down, on the one hand, you could say, okay, that's great because I'm looking at this aggregate royalty rate and I'm making sure that this is reasonable. But top-down has also a lot of shortcomings. And this is important to take into account before you apply top-down. For example, it's very important to have a rigorous essentiality assessment. But this assessment is done by experts in the field, that the methodology is transparent, that you reproduce the results so that later on in court you can check whether they have done in the right way, that you have sufficient documentation and other elements that need to be considered. So if you're interested, by the way, in this topic, there's an article written by Harris Tisilikas in Le Nouvelle, which means it must be also in SSRN. It's called Patent Landscaping Studies and Essentiality Checks. I think that's it. So there you can learn more about these shortcomings of the top-down. But again, you can see some courts are comfortable with comparable agreements, others prefer to do a cross-check, and they also use top-down. So we see both.
Great. Yes, I mean, and we also have a lot of experience and are trying to educate people more about the limitations of, data and looking at it. And, it is one indicator. It has to be done right. I did actually read some papers of your colleagues about patent valuation methods. I mean, the particular paper you're referring to, I don't know, but the other Bell article where he looks into citation counting and how that is useful or not. And I think it's great to have more people who do research and actually think about it, harder, how much, indication that brings. And, I'm a statistical economist. I think as to the rules of large numbers, there is some value in it, but the most important thing is it should be unbiased. And that's very difficult sometimes to reach unbiased results when counting data and these kind of things.
It is, yeah. And especially when you don't see transparency, when I see a report and there's no idea who has financed it. Exactly. I mean, these reports can be like 100,000 euros easily. And then you don't see who has paid for it. I really cannot believe they are just coming from the nowhere. So transparency on who has commissioned it, what has been the methodology. That's something that sometimes we don't see, how they came out with the ideas. there's no transparency around that. And if you don't have the basic information, how are you going to check whether this is done correctly or not? So having sometimes different people who do not know each other, doing maybe a selection of some of the patents and the other analyzing, having more people reviewing them. These are the kind of things which are super, super important when you're looking at essentiality.
No, I can only fully agree. We at Analytics at some point stopped to publish any rankings because you can never get it right because it's data, right? And data is always subject to how you refine it and what decisions within creating that data and ranking you make. And even some of our clients have published reports with different results because they use different timelines, they use different definitions of 5G. They use different refinements. And I think that is exactly what you're referring to. It's very important to, first of all, have transparency about what is going on. But even if you use the very same data, you may come up with different results because it's the questions you ask and the results that some people who commission a report or even the people who publish it, even if it's not commissioned, they have their own views as well, right? So I think that is the difficult part here. And I fully agree. Still though, policymakers call for transparency all the time. And I know that very well. We are in course of writing an impact study for the European Commission, and transparency is something that is requested not only by the European Commission more and more. And there are ideas floating around about how transparency could be improved, if it even needs to be improved. That would be my question. There's even ideas on publicly available claim charting databases. There was even a whole pilot study on how that could be done. I always, in my personal opinion, find this interesting, but at the same time, I see the challenge. I mean, we have two moving targets. The standard develops, patents are lapsed, expired, and new ones are filed. So even if you come up with some database, it must be updated on a weekly basis to somehow capture the dynamics. And then again, how would that be maintainable? Do you have any opinions on these kind of calls for transparency? How much transparency is needed? Will it actually solve the issues that you're referring to?
Well, I think that, God, there were many questions. but I'm going to take the last one because I think probably is the most important one. And I think transparency is not sufficient. Let me give you an example. Automotive is using our technology since 2010, more or less. So when we first approached them, they told us they wanted to have a platform, a pool, you name it, where you have a one-stop shopping and you have a critical mass of SEPs. So having the strongest portfolio, being part of it, they wanted to see the transparency regarding the royalty rates, regarding who has taken a license. And this is how Avanci started. Avanci is an independent licensing platform. And they created this. They started negotiating with SEP holders, with SEP users, and at the end, they managed to get a license agreement with BMW. And that was 2017, 7 years later. And that was one-time payment, $15 US, I would say a car wash. And after this prize was made published, we were very happy, and we thought, yes, now automotive is going to come here, and they're gonna take the license because you're getting 2G to 4G equal, and $15 one time. And if you're considering, let's say the average time of car, I believe it's 11 years in Europe. And how much money they are getting out of it just from the consumers. Let's forget the additional money they get from services and so on. But if I had one former student, Sunil Arya, who published in GRUA International paper on the value of standardized technology to connected cars, and he was looking at what consumers had to pay if they wanted to have connectivity, and he came from the hundreds to thousands of euros in this period. So $15, it's really, really a very good deal. And it's 100% transparency. But still you can see companies holding out and the need of litigation. So I guess that there has to be this willingness from the counterparty to negotiate in good faith. And every discussion of transparency has to go hand in hand with the discussion of this willingness, because otherwise it's just not going to work. And to your point, how much transparency, I think this is a very important one, because in all these discussions, and we raised again and again this point is, timing, costs, because just having a database where everybody is putting whatever claim charts that they consider they do without anybody checking, I don't think it's going to improve the system. If you check how many and who, we go back to this essentiality rigorous need. And if I look at our bilateral negotiations, where we have groups of experts and the hours that we spend to create a claim chart, I think this is why at the end of the day, when we have these comparable agreements, we have better results, because really several experts have been doing those analyses, and this is why courts are also looking at them more closely. That's this kind of reports where you really know what has been done. So it's important to see each report, transparency, expertise, and so on and so on.
Yes, and if I look at our database of patents that are declared, and we all know these are not necessarily essential, or the majority will not be, but for 5G alone, we have 50,000 declared patent families active, right? Not granted, but at least active. So I think the cost involved to claim chart 50,000 families is, not going to cover what, you at the very end get out of it, right? So I think that is, that's also something, right? We have to consider, how much costs. And I think even there, I've seen litigation at least where they have going on about a claim chart one way or another, and then at the very end, it turns out the patent is essential or not essential, but was just one claim chart in one court. So even if you get all patents claim chart, it doesn't mean you have the whole truth, I guess, behind it, because it's not only about the standards, it's also about the implementation. But all that complexity, I think, always is exactly the challenge that we have to deal with, and we have to find maybe some more simple solutions, as you said, that create incentives to get deals done. Yes. But one thing that is discussed right now, especially with the auto industry, especially in litigation, there is where to license in the value chain. And right now, Avanci offers this to OEMs, this licensing program. What is your opinion here? We do have in the market some SEP owners, due to their particular situation in the market, like Qualcomm and Huawei, who do license also to tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers. But why is this licensing in the value chain? Why does it make more sense for you, for example, to license to OEMs?
Okay, so before I go into this, I'm still thinking about the discussion we had before, and I think it's very important to clarify that the declarations that we see in what we heard about declare essential patents, these are basically patents that have been disclosed in a database as potentially essential patents and patent applications. And so at that time, you think, okay, that might be essential, so I'm going to put it in the database so people know, should any of these ever become essential, I'm willing to offer access on FRAND terms and conditions. And I think one of the problems has been when we see this data on potentially essential patents to be used as a tool to defend that this is the real number of essential patents. And this is, of course, not the case. That's why we have claim charts, and we have a process and experts and technical discussions to show that our portfolio is as strong as we say it is. Now back to this question. Automotive litigation. So, as I said before, automotive is using the technology since 2010. So if you look at the last 12 years, there's been barely litigation, despite the fact that they are getting massive revenues. We have, in the meantime, situation. We have seen Avanci. Avanci has right now a lot of companies having signed: Daimler, Volkswagen, GM, Volvo, Ford, recently a novice, of course. It's a lot of momentum now with Avanci, and my hope, maybe I'm too optimistic, but my hope is that this thing with the automotive industry is getting resolved. But there are many reasons why automotive, or let's say there are many reasons why companies refer to licenses at the OEM level. We have legal reasons in terms of exhaustion. We have technical reasons, like mismatch between the patent scope. We have administrative reasons in terms of how we want to monitor this. But one big reason is the value point. The value is only fully realized by the OEM. So the companies are increasing the value that they derive from our technology year after year. And they are doing it because the car is connected to a network, which, by the way, is exactly what our patents are about. But they do not pass any of this value to the TCU suppliers. So what I see is OEMs pushing down on cost on the supply chain. And when it achieves to this extreme level, like we have seen here in automotive, there's no price that is acceptable for the lower level of the value chain. It's just they don't have the money. They have been squeezed so much that the only party that retains all the economic value is the OEM. So it makes sense that courts have recognized that licensees need to respect the industry practice in the ICT field, which is licensed at the end level, end device level. Courts also stated that there is no obligation to license to suppliers, only grant access to them, and that, by the way, what they need to have is this access, which they get via the have-made rights. And here I have 3 papers that I would like to recommend to you. The first one is from Richard Berry, the case for the defense, access to all versus license to all. This you can have, I think if you Google it, you can get it. I think he explains very, very easily this quite complex situation. The other one is a little bit longer paper that's from Hayden, Padilla, and Peters. And this is on the value of standard essential patents and the level of licensing. And by the way, we have a summary for FRAND Council if you don't want to read the long paper, but I strongly recommend you to do. And then the third one is from Borghetti, Nikolic, and Petit. And this is on FRAND licensing under EU law. And to see also this complexity between license to all and access to all, we also have an infographic in for FRAND Council that is very good to look at.
That's a good short list for reading up on this. Thank you, Claudia, for providing. I think it makes a lot of sense. Understanding where the technology creates the value, and my guess is that if that as you said, the economic basically profits are typically observed by the OEMs, not by the suppliers. But if that world would be different, you could probably also license at a different level where they have the means of adding the cost of connectivity on top of their cost for a component, I guess, right? This is basically getting to the next question, because the automotive industry, as you said, you said 7 years before Avanci even was founded, or when they had the first deal with BMW, they started 10 or 7 years before that. So we're now, what is it now? 12 years of automotive connectivity negotiations. There will be other industries coming, which people refer to often as the IoT, and of course different industry verticals here. What I heard recently from some of the industry experts that it is expected that the whole industry looks different compared to the auto industry. The auto industry has a few OEMs, large corporations, that you can approach for a license, and that solves a lot of licensing in terms of the number of cars sold. IoT will probably be more like a long tail market. A lot of small, medium-sized, maybe even startups that implement connectivity supported by 5G, But maybe here, the component manufacturers are the bigger ones, that may be in a bigger situation, that they, I don't know that exactly, but maybe they then capture more of the profits here. What do you think? Could it be that for IoT, the where to license in the value chain will have to be much more flexible, or you foresee anything here?
So I guess if you're asking here if this component level licensing would be better than going into what we are doing with the OEMs, right? I think we still cannot do it. and I explain you why. When you go to component level licensing, you have the same problems, starting with the value differentiation. You have a different value depending on where it is implemented. You have the exhaustion issues, you have the monitoring issues. And I think there are other ways of addressing this situation of having a large number of IoT licensees. I'm thinking now about patent pools that have over 1,000 licensees. It has worked. We have seen it in the past. It's not something unique. I think that industry will always move forward towards the most optimal solution. So pools might be an interesting way of to go when you face this fragmented environment with a very large number of implementers. So I believe this is a much better solution than trying to go to component level licensing because of all these concerns that I have raised. By the way, on patent pools, I have my whole collection of papers. On patent pools, I will recommend for you to read a paper has been published in Les Nouvelles, which means it's also in Switzerland. It's from Julia Brito and Hector Axel Contreras, and it's called Patent Pools, A Practical Perspective. I know they put a lot of effort behind. They talk to different patent pools. They talk to different implementers and contributors. So I think they did a very good job into trying to present what are the pros, the cons, in these constellations that were better than others. So I recommend it. You see, I have my whole list of papers.
Oh, that is great.
Comes again and again.
This is important. I like when people really spend some time and write down something and think hard about problems or challenges, I would call them rather. I mean, for me, naturally, as an economist, if we have a long-tail market of licensees that are OEMs that are small, medium-sized, I think the only solution to efficiently do that is a pool. I don't think that anyone would send their lawyers and licensing in-house teams after these small fish, right? I mean, this probably wouldn't make sense to anyone. But that is exactly why I was wondering, maybe it's more efficient to go to, those that are bigger. But I see your point, why it's difficult to license component levels. If you think about 5G as a technology, as a game changer, though, I keep reading reports on where 5G will be integrated in toasters and refrigerators, but then talking to some of the industry experts that are selling those, devices, let's say, they also argue, well, 5G is great. 5G will be one of the technologies, but we are already working with Bluetooth, which works fine, or DECT, which is also a standard that has been used a lot because we don't need the video, we don't need the data transfer bandwidth that 5G provides. What is your, I mean, in a way, I feel that 5G for IoT at least has a lot more competition than for handsets or automotive. And, I think the licensing could be maybe also one way to have that efficiently used or solved to get 5G out there and be one of the dominant standards for IoT as well, right?
Yes, so I think this connects me a bit with we discussed before, patent pools and platforms like Avanci. And maybe they are not like the only solution, but they are definitely a part of the solution. And I fully agree with you. We don't know exactly how IoT is going to evolve. IoT, by the way, has been around at that time called M2M since the beginning of the GSM data in the 90s with the M2M applications. So The question is now how much of the deployment is going to go via wireless connectivity. A lot of the connections are going to be fixed. And as you said, Wi-Fi, for example, or for example, traffic lights. Maybe they may be connected via fiber cables. But then again, the traffic jump to the cars that may be connected via cellular connectivity. So I guess the idea that everything is going to be connected via cellular technologies, that's not accurate. I think here we can agree on this. But this is also something that gives an incentive to us to compete offering the best technology, but also to provide solutions that makes the licensing as easy as possible. And I don't think we have any interest in making it difficult for everyone. We spent a decade to create 5G. We don't want to waste all this investment just because we are not able to find the right licensing solution. But, and this is an important but, this solution has to be optimal. We have to look at different considerations. Patent pools might be an option, bilateral negotiations. So, but at the end, it's my experience is that the policy and the industry adapts. And we have seen it with Avanci, for example. So we will find the best thing for the industry, as we have always done.
Yeah, I think it's good news in a way that there is a bit more competition among standards, so we really will have something efficient. On the other hand, I wish that the best technology wins. It shouldn't be about the patent. It should really be about what is the fastest, cheapest, and most efficient way to get connected. Because I'm reading up, all these fixed cables maybe, but it's also very expensive to have these in the first place and to maintain these. And, and wireless, I think, should be the future. I mean, if everything is at least possibly moving, right?
We're working on it.
Exactly. I think so. Besides all these FRAND and SEPs topics, if 5G is successful, I think it's in the end that the industries benefit from the technology in the first place. And, some of that benefit will have to go back to the patent owners who did the R&D. But yeah, if that is so much more surplus to what they do without 5G, I think then we have a working system. So I hope that will prevail all these discussions about FRAND and SCPs. But I think in a natural way, it will be much more because there's a lot more competition. But great, this has been really great, Claudia. And time flies because there's so many things we can and could discuss this forever. But I always give anyone in the podcast a chance for the final statement to allow you to keep something remembering from people from Claudia Tapia and your final pitch on what you think is important when discussing these topics.
Okay. I feel that this is the kind when the people are multitasking, and this is the time you should stop multitasking and listening. It's like the 60 seconds that everybody has to listen. So let me start by saying that standardization and the FRAND licensing is basically a framework, and this is a framework targeted to making people work together, share technology for the great of good. And of course, if we look at the challenges ahead, I'm talking about the energy prices going up, talking about climate change, but many others. We do need to find global solutions and solutions that really work and are affordable. When I think about this, I feel that, this is a model. FRAND should be a model that should be embraced, and shared, and fostered by all decision makers. And it should be seen as this incentive to innovate together. But of course, and we have discussed it several times, there needs to be compensation, incentives also to negotiate in good faith. And when I'm talking about compensation, I think it has to be such that allows for everybody to join. And I mean, this means including startups and including research institutions. And I feel that this part of the debate is kind of missing. The focus is about these little details, but they are missing bigger picture, how important standards and FRAND are, and all that has been achieved and we will achieve thanks to this system. So let's change it. And since I'm here, I wanted to let you know that I'm started an Instagram account. It's called IP with Claudia Tapia. You need to be a little bit patient because I'm creating the content, but I think in a couple of weeks I will be able to upload. So for those who wants to keep learning about this exciting topic, but also about IP in general, please feel free to join me. I'll be happy to see you there. And again, Tim, a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me today.
The pleasure is mine. I will definitely look up that Instagram account. I'm so glad that makes Instagram now. That is good. It's needed that it's shared more, and there's a lot more interest on these topics. It was really great having you. Thanks for your elaborations on all these complex topics. Everyone who listened in, thank you for listening. This was Claudia Tapia with Ericsson. Thank you so much, and you have a great day.